Hi everyone, my name is Güneş Ertan and this is another GLODEM speakers series event. This event is also part of our International Relations Department colloquium series. Today we are very happy to host Professor Jale Tosun from Heidelberg University. She's been, I think, one of the most prolific scholars of public policy in recent years. And today she's going to talk about China and Russia in high-level forums on energy governance. I want to very quickly provide an introduction before I leave the floor to Dr. Tosun. Jale Tosun is a professor at the Institute of Political Science, Heidelberg University. Her research interests comprise a wide range of topics in comparative public policy, international and comparative political economy, European integration, public administration, and risk governance. She has published widely on these issues, for instance, in the European Journal of Political Research, the Journal of Common Market Studies, and the Journal of European Public Policy. She has authored the books Environmental Policy Change in Emerging Market Democracies, Risk Regulation in Europe, and she also has a very useful public policy text with Christopher Neal called Public Policy and Introduction. Without further ado, I would like to leave the floor to Dr. Tosun.
Thank you so much for this very kind introduction, Güneş, and also for inviting me. I mean, it's great to be in Istanbul today and not even having to leave my living room for joining you. I mean, this is perhaps one of the more positive sides of the current situation we're all going through. Well, yes, I'm delighted to talk to you today about an issue I started to take an interest in, I think, about 1.5 years ago, which are so-called high-level forums on energy governance. And I'm going to explain to you what this is about in a second. And I think it's useful to flag at this point already that China and Russia will feature prominently in this talk, but it's not only about China and Russia, but this is a comparison of countries I recently started to take a great interest in for several reasons, which I'm also going to outline to you shortly. So this presentation is actually a merger of two paper projects I'm collaborating on with Adrian Rinscheid on the one hand, on the other hand with Karina Chirirok. And I think by bringing these parts together, we have an even more engaging and interesting basis for the subsequent Q&A. So what is the point of departure for today's presentation? Well, I told you I started to take an interest in these kind of small-scale international organizations about 1.5 or 2 years ago, but that pretty much coincides with the ending or termination of a cost action, which I chaired, at least one of the working groups I chaired, and which was a joint network initiative with Andy Jordan, Dave Heitema, Aileen Boisson, and Michael Hilton. And the idea of that cost action, which was called InnerGov, was to pick up a theoretical framework developed not only by Elinor Ostrom, although she's the one who's best known for this, but actually also Vincent Ostrom, which is why I refer to the Ostroms here. And it's called Polycentric Governance. And the idea of polycentric governance is that we adopt a new way of thinking about the international system, but it does not have to be the international system, but I'll first start with the international system. In a sense that we don't only look at the United Nations Framework Convention on climate change and also the conference of the parties that take place on an annual basis, but that we broaden our purview and also our understanding of the actors that actually participate in producing innovations to address climate change. And so you see here a network, a stylized network here to illustrate the essence of this understanding of polycentric governance. I mean, as the name already suggests, you have several actors, and you have a number of well, centers, if you wish, that coexist. And these centers bring together actors that work on one topic, but these centers then can also reach out to other groups or other clusters that work on other themes, so that they can also learn from each other. That's the idea of polycentric governance, to move away from this very static and hierarchical understanding of how climate governance actually functions, but to appreciate the diversity of organizations that have emerged and that actually participate in this overarching governance process. And perhaps it's important to flag at this point already that the fact why we have such an institutional landscape now, and other scholars refer to it as a regime complex, so that's more the language used by Cohen and Victor. Then we have the group by Frank Biermann, and they speak of fragmented climate governance landscape. So the reason why we have a polycentric, fragmented, or complex regime type climate governance is that in the past, the UNFCCC-led process, which puts the framework convention at its center, failed to deliver results. So I think the most eye-opening moment was at the Conference of the Parties that took place in Copenhagen in 2009, when the idea was actually to negotiate a follow-up agreement on the Kyoto Protocol, which did not materialize. So the expectations for that Conference of the Parties meeting were very high. And Denmark in particular, as the host, had very, very high ambitions to come up with a very ambitious follow-up agreement to the Kyoto Protocol, but these didn't materialize, mostly because China, but also the United States, did not really come along. I'll talk a bit more about the United States and China afterwards, but what is an important takeaway message is that because of the frustration with this state-led international climate negotiations, a number of other types of initiatives started to develop with a smaller number of members. This is the phenomenon I'm interested in. But also organizations where you have state actors collaborating with NGOs, but also with private companies. So subsequent to the Copenhagen summit, I think the landscape of climate governance has indeed become very, very diverse and approaches something which would correspond to an ideal of a polycentric system as defined by the Ostroms. And in the work of Vincent and Elinor Ostrom, polycentric governance is associated with 5 key features which facilitate collaboration. So the first one is that these arrangements allow for local action. So you don't have to go through via the global level, but you can also address more local level or regional level issues and come up with more specific policy solutions. Then you have this process of mutual adjustments, which happens if you have different actors coming together. So you have these sub-networks in a broader network, and when they come together, they have to react to each other, which can unleash policy learning, for example. The third founding block of polycentric governance is that you have a mechanism which is called experimentation, because you don't have to justify the actions all the way up to the United Nations. You can start a climate change policy experiment. You can, for example, provide subsidies for electric cars and then see whether it works out or not. And if that experiment fails, well, no one will bother about it. But if it is successful, then you can use it to increase your reputation. You can also use it as an input when you meet with other with other actors active on climate action. And so this structure facilitates experimentation. And it also ensures that, the actors working on climate issues, that they develop a sense of trust, because it's a repeated interaction model. So it may well be the case that you collaborate with government A in one context, but then you encounter government A in another context, because you have these overlapping networks. And since you're well aware of like what government A is doing in different networks, you have transparency, and that transparency is a necessary condition for developing trusts. But what you need for this to function is overarching rules, and usually when you have trust, you also see that actors that are involved in such arrangements also voluntarily adopt overarching rules, which then can perhaps start as voluntary rules, but one day become formalized rules. And so these are the core propositions of polycentric governance, and if you accept this perspective on global climate governance or global energy governance, and well, you won't be too surprised to learn that I do, then you start to become interested in all sorts of organizations that are now part of this fragmented climate governance landscape. And one of the organizations which has developed actually in reaction to the failure of the Copenhagen summit, I mean, it was not a failure in that sense that that no agreement was reached, but it was a very disappointing agreement which was reached. And therefore, usually in the literature, the Copenhagen summit is associated with failure or with disappointment. But in response to that disappointment, one international organization was founded, and this is the organization I'm going to talk about today. It's called the Clean Energy Ministerial, and you may be surprised to hear that, but it was actually founded by the United States. So it was a reaction, a direct reaction by the Obama government to the fact that apparently it was not possible to reach agreement among all states participating in the UNFCCC process. And so the idea of the Department of Energy, which was then led by a Nobel laureate in physics, he thought, okay, perhaps if we reduce the number of countries to come together and collaborate on clean energy issues, then we stand a better chance to overcome obstacles to collaboration. So the idea, Stephen Chu, that's the name of the then State Secretary. So his idea was to come up with an alternative organizational structure that brings together the relevant players in climate governance, which means the countries that also produce the highest amount of emissions, and to propose a structure where these countries would come together, but not at the level of the heads of government, but at the level of those who actually design and implement energy policy. And here the understanding is that energy policy is a key policy to facilitate climate action. So the idea here was that this organization would not bring the heads of governments together, but the ministers who work on energy issues. And I've become quite familiar with this organization in the meantime. Oftentimes, it was not even the ministers that attended these meetings, but the directors general of the in the ministries who had like the best knowledge on issues related to energy. Renewable energy, but mind you, it's not a renewables club. It's the Clean Energy Ministerial is called the Clean Energy Ministerial with good reason, because right from the beginning it also included aspects related to so-called negative emissions technologies. So it has promoted right from the beginning carbon capture and storage, for example. But there's also a very big component in this organization that concentrates on renewable energy, on energy efficiency, and also making energy infrastructure more efficient. And this organization has yearly meetings. So this was the meeting in Vancouver, to give you an idea what these meetings look like. And the next one is coming up. It will take place in Chile. I assume it's going to be a virtual one, but it will take place in May, end of May and June, and I'm already looking forward to see what they will decide then. So when we look at the SEM, I think what's interesting is, so this perspective of polycentric governance does not directly relate to individual organizations, but rather to the context in which these organizations cooperate with other organizations. But if we look at the Clean Energy Ministerial, or SEM as I'm going to abbreviate it from now on, so the SEM corresponds to one of the many knots we've just seen in this stylized illustration of polycentric systems. And if we look at the mechanisms of how the SEM functions, it's actually interesting that it kind of complies with many positive features with which polycentric systems, so if we look at these macro level structures, are associated with. So it is actually interested in unleashing mutual adjustment processes. It is very open to experimentation, and I will touch upon this point later on. It aims to develop trust, develop and sustain trust, and it is about giving the member states overarching rules. What is a bit different here is that it is not specifically interested in local level action, but more in transnational action. So the idea is definitely not that it's just one country doing something, but that it is a group of countries working together to address a specific issue of transition to clean energy. And there are three components to the SEM work. So I just mentioned the annual meetings. These annual meetings are important because this is when the Secretariat shares with the member states its evaluation of how the work of the SEM has been in the past year. And it's also where the ministers usually come together and kind of design a political agenda. But it is not just membership in the SEM which is analytically interesting, or it's also not interesting who attends the annual meetings. What is more interesting is that the SEM is actually a collection of so-called initiatives, and initiatives corresponds to something like, well, policy initiatives, if you wish. These initiatives, they are usually proposed by 1, 2, or 3 countries. That's also an important organizational feature of the SEM, that it is committed to a model of distributed leadership. So what SEM really wants to see is that countries come together and propose an initiative to address a specific aspect related to clean energy transition. And here you have one example, which is the Clean Vehicles Initiative. And in addition to that, you have campaigns. And campaigns are more experimental. They are also more specific, and they're usually temporary measures, whereas the initiatives, if they function well, and I just explained, there's also some sort of monitoring of whether they go well or not. But with the campaigns, it's clear they're proposed for a beginning for a limited period of time, let's say for 5 years or so, and then they are graduated. Usually they are not prolonged. If they are very successful, they usually become transformed into initiatives, but these are really experimental elements and of a temporary nature. And I decided to give you here 2 examples of such campaigns, also to show you another important feature of the SEM. So you see that Equal by 30 is a campaign which aims to promote gender equality in the clean energy sector. So it mainly aims to make jobs in the energy sector more attractive to women. But next to it, you also see the Nearly Zero Energy Buildings Initiative. And there you see that there's this indication that it was graduated. Because this is, for example, one of the campaigns that really did not function well. There were no, the collaboration just didn't function. There were no results. And so the SEM decided to terminate that. And the same actually has happened with initiatives. So initiatives can be launched by the member states, but if the SEM Secretariat reports that there is no activity or that the activities don't lead to the expected outcome, these initiatives can also be terminated, which is an important feature. And I will also pick up on this afterwards when I present you some analytical findings. So what I'm going to discuss with you for the next minutes to come is, so the SEM is an international organization which has specific institutional features. And these features aim at facilitating collaboration on specific clean energy related topics. And so I think before going into the issue with China and Russia, it's important to develop a more general understanding of what actually determines the participation of SEM members in certain initiatives. So when do they participate and when do they decide to skip an initiative? So there is no formal requirement to participate or to lead an initiative. This is all voluntary. And then, as I briefly mentioned earlier, the SEM is an organization which was founded by the United States, and it was founded by the Obama administration. And as you may imagine, with the change in government, so when Trump took over, there was actually an announcement by the Trump administration that they're not interested in this organization anymore. And that and they almost invited other states to step in and to play a more dominant role in this organization, states or organizations actually, because as I will explain to you later, it was not that much a state stepping in, but another international organization, which is the International Energy Agency. But considering the fact that the United States lost interest in the SEM, it would have been a plausible thing to expect that the other two major powers, China on the one hand, and perhaps Russia, would have considered stepping into the United States footsteps and to play a more dominant role in the organization. And this is actually why I think it's interesting to compare China to Russia and how their involvement in the SEM has developed since then. So in terms of theoretical considerations, I decided to keep this short, because I think there's one very straightforward hypothesis with regard to the first research question, which is that given that the SEM is an organization where the energy ministers play an important role, I think it's a plausible hypothesis to think, well, it could be the case that the involvement in the SEM changes also if there's a change of the minister responsible for the energy field. So that's the first hypothesis, that the participation in these SEM initiatives depends on who is the Minister of Energy. And then turning to the second research question on China and Russia, I think it's more plausible to say there's this assumption that these two would be interested in filling the power gap in this organization. But it's also plausible to think that China has a greater interest in playing a more active role in this organization, simply because it's under greater pressure to curb its climate emissions. And I'm going to elaborate a little bit on that in a couple of minutes. So let's take a look at how not only China and Russia, but also on how all members of the SEM have actually participated in this organization. So you see the countries that are members of the Clean Energy Ministerial. So it should be 26 or 7 right now. And then there's the European Commission, which is of course not a state, and therefore it's not highlighted here. But the European Commission is also a member of it. So on the first bar graph, you see the countries that were leaders in an initiative in the year 2013, and then the lighter bar shows you the countries that claimed leadership of an initiative in the year 2021, so the most recent year. And what you see here is, first of all, so these are percentage shares reported by the figures, and what you see here is well, a very plausible finding, at least with regard to leading initiatives, in the sense that the United States clearly stand out, even in the year 2021, as the country which is like the top leader with regard to initiatives in the Clean Energy Ministerial. I mean, this is the organization they founded, and they were also the ones to launch initiatives on which they had a strategic interest. And what you also see is, and this is something I would like to flag, is that if you take a look at Canada, so in the beginning, Canada did not perform any leadership in the Clean Energy Ministerial. But at the moment when the Trump administration announced that it's not interested in playing a dominant role in the Clean Energy Ministerial anymore, because they were not interested in climate governance, you can see that Canada has actually stepped in rather than China or Russia, which we also see here. Actually, there is no leadership at all of Russia, as you can see here. But you see that there is some leadership of China. But China also doesn't stand out as a country which is very, very active in starting and leading new initiatives, but it is rather Canada and India which stepped in to fill the vacuum the United States actually caused. So this is the analysis for the leadership of initiatives, but you don't have to be a leader to participate in the initiatives. You can also be involved in the SEM activities by being a member of an initiative which was proposed by other members. And if we take a look here, we see, well, the United States hardly participate in initiatives which they did not propose themselves. So they usually participate in a SEM only if this is a proposal they brought forward. But you see here, for example, Mexico is one of the countries that is quite active with regard to membership. South Africa, Sweden used to be very active, but it has lost a bit interest in here. But you see Finland, for example, is also very active. What is interesting, and this kind of touches already upon the second research question on China and Russia, is that, well, both participate in SEM initiatives, but again, they don't really stand out too much, right? They don't stand out, so they're somewhere in the middle, which is a bit, well, surprising, at least if you are aware of this literature on great powers and so on and so forth, that these two countries, they don't have, like, they don't demonstrate any specific pattern at this point, right? So they look like regular members in this organization. For testing what determines membership in the initiatives, we put together a database. It was mostly me, I have to say. I'm just flagging this because I have a really good knowledge of this database, and I also suffered a bit in putting it together. So I just wanted to get some credit for that. So the nice thing about the Clean Energy Ministerial is that that in the run-up of these annual meetings, they publish these reports, which give you an overview of participation in Clean Energy Ministerial initiatives and campaigns. We did not pay attention to campaigns simply because these are the temporary measures, but we coded only the initiatives, and this is the database. And on the basis of this database, so first of all, you see that there are several initiatives. So I think right now there are still 16 initiatives in place, but the number of initiatives that are eligible for involvement varies over time. So I think the highest number of initiatives, I think we will see this on one of the subsequent slides, was 20 something. Right now it's a relatively low number, for example, because some initiatives were terminated or they have been moved to the International Energy Agency. So the possibility for participation is not always the same, but it varies over time, which from an analytical viewpoint is on the one hand very nice, but on the other hand it's also tedious and requires that you actually treat each and every initiative as a specific case, because these initiatives have different starting points and they also have different ending points. And also the members of the SEM, many of them joined at the same time in the year 2010, but not all of them. Some joined a little bit later. So for an accurate statistical assessment of the factors that matter for participating in these initiatives, you actually have to come up with a statistical technique that takes into account these different, well, I would refer to them as risk sets or opportunity sets, so that participation in an initiative can actually materialize. So just to give you a sense, this is how we measured the dependent variable. And these are the variables we use for the analysis. So we use data on the share of renewable energies. We also use data on the share of industry in countries, CO2 emissions per capita. Then we have information on whether a country has a right-wing energy minister in place. Then the next variable has a bit of a strange name, as I must admit, but it means whether the ministry, not the person, but the ministry combines energy with issues related to environmental protection or climate change or sustainability more broadly. We have another variable where we control for the years for which a minister has actually worked on energy issues. So it captures the tenure of a minister in years. We have a measure on national climate policies adopted by the member states. We control for EU membership, and we also control for whether the countries were ever acted as a host of the Clean Energy Ministerial. And then we have a measurement which comes from the World Bank on state capacity, because all the work you do in the Clean Energy Ministerial, you have a secretariat, but it is effectively the ministries that have to do the work, the national ministries. So countries who have, well, limited capacity, we would expect them not to be too active in many initiatives, simply because it means that they have to bear the cost, they need to have the personnel and all sorts of other resources. And we use these variables to estimate event history models. And these are specified in a way that and so this is just some exemplary findings. We analyzed all initiatives that existed since the beginning of the SEM, and of which many still exist. And we used event history models here to see to what extent changes in these covariates actually correspond or are correlated with changes in the likelihood of becoming a member of these initiatives. And the initiatives I'm presenting you here all have to do with energy efficiency. And what I usually do is I prepare coefficient plots, but here I thought it's useful to show you the regression models, because we have so many of them, but also to give you a sense of the broader pattern which explains participation. So what we observe with most initiatives which we treated as outcome variables is that countries that already have higher shares of renewable energies are less likely to join these initiatives. This is indicated by a coefficient which is smaller than 1. What we also found was, so countries with climate policy, not with all initiatives, but with several initiatives, they were more likely to join. But what we kind of did not find as a robust thing is that the party membership of the minister matters. We also calculated other models where we play around with the minister and also with the ideology of the government or of the head of government, also with whether there was a change in government or not. So we played around with many. Yes,
I'm so sorry. There is a box. I'm sorry, a question in the chat box.
I'm not seeing this. I'm sorry. Just
I'll
could
just
you read it out to me?
Hocam, are these marginal coefficients, odd ratios, or original ones?
So these are
our students can follow the
absolutely. So these are exponentiated coefficients, exponentiated Cox coefficients. Not the odds, so it corresponds to odds ratios, but the interpretation is a bit different in the event history setup. So a coefficient, an exponentiated coefficient of 1 entails that an increase in this variable increases the likelihood that this event happens. And a coefficient smaller than 1 indicates that an increase in this variable reduces the likelihood that the event of interest happens.
Okay, thank you so much.
I'm sorry I didn't see it because since I'm sharing my screen with you guys, I don't see the chat, unfortunately. So Güneş, can I rely on you to bring any question to my attention as we,
exactly,
as we go
yeah,
forward? Brilliant, thank you so much. So the most robust finding is actually that the first 2 variables, industry share and also renewables, they seem to matter for participation. And we have only 2 models out of 17, where I think, or 3 models out of 17, where we have a significant effect of the partisan membership of the minister and also of the design of the ministry, right? So we don't have any robust effect of ministers or ministries with regard to whether countries are more likely to join these initiatives or not. Tenure seems to matter a little bit, but again, also this is not very robust, which also, again, is a strong argument in favor of not lumping all these different initiatives together, but treating membership in these initiatives as separate outcomes, because as you can already see here, the explanatory variables that are significant, or also if you look at the ACAIC information criterion, the AIC given at the bottom, you also see that the model fit is it varies a lot. It's super different across the models, right? So, but that has also to do with the fact that these initiatives started not always at the same time. And so the risk set for the countries is also different. So for the first 2 models, only 22 of the countries could be taken into consideration because these were initiatives that started in 2010. But then the latter 2, EcoTown, for example, which is actually one of the few initiatives which was led by Russia, there we could include 26 countries. So there's a lot of variation also in these initiatives, which I think is very, makes it even more plausible not to look at membership in the SEM only, but to look specifically in who participates in what initiatives. So even though I think from a theoretical viewpoint, it's plausible, it's very plausible to think that there should be a minister effect, because it is all about ministers in the end. There is no robust finding for that, but it is rather functional considerations that explain participation in the initiatives. There's also a bit of a host effect. So countries that were once hosts of these annual meetings also generally have a bit of a higher propensity to join. But there is no support for our hypothesis that it is all about the ministers that matter here, despite the name of this organization. And this is, I think, from a theoretical viewpoint, perhaps a disappointing finding. But from a political viewpoint, it's actually a very good finding. Why? Because one of the ideas when founding the Clean Energy Ministerial was actually to design an organization which is depoliticized, which is robust against changes in the political composition of the people that actually come together, you know, to come up with a forum where you take decisions on initiatives which are sticky, you know, which are robust or relatively invariant with regard to who comes in and who leaves office. So I think from a practical or political viewpoint, this is actually rather good news here, right? So what I can tell you is there's a lot of variation in which country participates in which initiative, but the decision whether they participate in an initiative or not is not driven by the ministers, or in very few cases is this driven by the ministers and their ideological viewpoints. In most cases, it has to do with functional considerations. So countries that have already a high level of renewable energies, they don't participate in initiatives on energy efficiency and on renewable energy, but they go for other initiatives such as electric vehicles, for example. So unfortunately, I don't have time to show you all the findings we got, but if you see the overall findings, it's super plausible actually to see that this is more a functional story to tell. Even though we don't like it so much in political science, we always like things to be more political. But in this case, I can say the idea to come up with a depoliticized design for an international organization seems to work actually. If you have any questions on this aspect, I'm happy to take them right now. If not, I'll turn to China and Russia more specifically.
How would you like to proceed? Would you like to get questions at this point or at the end of your talk?
I think I could also finish it up, but if there's a question of understanding, I think it's nice if we take this together, perhaps. But I just thought, since there was this question earlier, I'm also happy to take any questions.
Then I will ask a short question.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Can you give a little bit more information about what does it entail to participate in policy initiatives?
Mm-hmm. So it actually means that you work together with your colleagues in the other national ministries. So you really commit yourself to this. It means you collaborate with the others on a regular basis. And it also means that there is a monitoring by the secretariat. So if you commit yourself to an initiative and then you just don't call back when your colleagues call you for a meeting, that casts a bad light on you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, because I was thinking whether costs of participation is uniform across these policy initiatives.
Well, I think the mechanism is the same, because the mechanism is you commit yourself to something voluntarily, but once you commit, you're expected to collaborate. And this is also why we thought it's important to control for capacity, because, and this is also, unfortunately, capacity also is not, we don't have a uniform support for that. But you see here in the case of this initiative, which was on making energy infrastructure more energy efficient, you see here that a higher capacity also increases the likelihood of committing yourself to work in this initiative, right? So the capacity variable is not significant across all models. And I told you I have 14 more models to share with you if you like. But in most cases, at least the coefficient is greater than 1, which suggests there's a positive relationship. And only in very few cases it's negative, like in this second initiative, for example, it's negative. But it is a capacity issue. So if you commit yourself, you really need to have, you know, the resources to collaborate with your colleagues. And that, of course, also comes with additional costs because you have coordination costs. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I have some other questions, but maybe towards
sure.
that we can also ask participants to.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Jale. This was really, you know, thought-provoking, sophisticated analysis. It's been really a pleasure to, you know, have you or to talk on this subject. I have a very quick question. How is there any mechanisms facilitating collaboration, coordination, and more often, you know, communication among these actors so that they would be able to, be on the same page in
Yeah.
what the problem is and what should be the solution and what they need to do. So my question is more from, institutionalist perspective.
And this is what I would have expected from you. No, that makes perfect sense. Two answers to that very important question. The first one is there is the secretariat. And so there's the SEM secretariat, which in the beginning used to be part of the Department of Energy in the United States. And then it migrated from the United States to the International Energy Agency. Now the Clean Energy Ministerial has become part of the International Energy Agency. Right? So they also use their resources. So they moved from Washington to Paris. That had also to do with Trump, because they actually were afraid that if Trump were to be elected president, and that was already in 2000, it was already in 2015, they kind of like were a bit afraid of this. They reached out to Paris and said, is there a possibility we can move this over to make sure that, no harm is done to this? It's interesting actually from that viewpoint. So there's the Clean Energy the Secretariat that helps them. And the second thing is, well, this is exactly why leadership of these initiatives is important, because the leaders are the ones that define the rules of the collaboration. So if you have like leaders who don't lead in this process, then you have a problem, right? And this is when you end up with an initiative. I think I showed you this, which is then terminated. So you have some of these initiatives, they were around for 4 to 5 years, and then they were terminated because nothing happened. Right? So this is the mechanism. So there is the secretariat that is a facilitator, and then it is really the leaders that define the more specific rules of the game and how this is supposed to work out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But it's an interesting construct, I think, from an institutional perspective.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So it is actually a polycentric system within a polycentric system, if you wish. Yeah?
I see that.
Okay, yeah, let's push on and talk a bit more about China and Russia. I think this won't come as a surprise to any of you. These are the major emittents of fossil fuel emissions in the world. And as you see, well, China produces quite some emissions, which has to do with its industry, but also because of, so it's manufacturing and industry, but also with the fact that it is a producer of fossil fuels, which also produces emissions. Russia has some contribution to fossil fuels, but compared to China, it is still in a rather comfortable situation, because China has a higher carbon footprint compared to Russia. And the problem from the Chinese perspective is that China is still growing. This is not where it's going to end, right? So this is rather an interim impression of China's emissions, because if you take a look at the growth rate of China, in a few years, if they don't take action, this is going to be double as much as it is right now, right? Because also emissions, they don't increase in a linear fashion. It depends a bit on the emission types, but some of them, well, they increase very fast, actually, not exponentially, but also not in a linear fashion. So from the Chinese perspective, it's a problem to have this high emissions level now, and to know that this is the beginning of their journey towards becoming perhaps the major economic power in the world. So the Chinese government is pretty aware of the fact that it needs to do something. And also, if we take a look at the energy sources used in these two countries, we see that China has a particular problem with coal. Coal is still the main energy source, actually, in China. It also relies a lot on oil and gas. And from a Chinese perspective, not only problematic with regard to emissions, but perhaps even more because the oil it uses and the gas, it comes also from Russia, but not only from Russia, but also from Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. So it is actually very dependent on fossil fuel imports. So this is something that the Chinese government is not very keen on, which is the reason why in the past they started to promote hydro. As you see, the share of hydropower is much higher in China compared to Russia, and also of renewables. So one of the reasons one would argue that China goes into renewables is definitely not only because they're so worried about climate change, but it is that they're worried that their dependence on imported fuel threatens their economic development agenda. Right, but there are also social movements and everything in China, and that these social movements, like for example, they particularly target coal-fired power plants because these are the ones that actually produce the highest level of air emissions, which people can feel. They breathe these in literally, and this is kind of like the aspect that puts the Chinese government quite under some pressure. And in general, you see that China, compared to Russia, consumes so much energy actually. If we now take a look at how these two countries have participated in the CEM from 2010 until 2021, you first of all see the mean of all countries in the number of initiatives in which they played a leadership role. And the data, for whichever reason, is only available from 2012 onwards, which is the reason why in the beginning it starts with 0. It's just impossible to reconstruct who was the leader back then. So therefore, ignore anything that comes before 2012, because it's only 2012 when we have data for who actually led initiatives. And so the solid line gives you the average number of initiatives where any member was a leader in. And then you see the dashed line for China, and it shows you that in the beginning it was pretty much at the average level with the other countries. But since 2017, it has really taken on, right? So if we think back of the bar graphs we've seen earlier, China does not stand out in terms of being like the most active country other than the United States in the Clean Energy Ministerial, but it is much more active than many other countries, right? So therefore, China's willingness to act as a leader is above average, but it is still not as well visible as in the case of China or as in the case of India, for example, right? So China kind of comes after these two countries, and Russia, as you can see, they were. Russia was actually a co-leader of an initiative, and this is one of the reasons why I chose this set of initiatives. So Russia, together with Korea, was a co-leader of this initiative, the Ecotown initiative, but it performed so bad that it was actually terminated last year. So, which is the reason why Russia had this leadership level, which then went down because the initiative altogether was terminated, because kind of still too obsessed with China at this point, because Russia and also its co-leader, Korea, they did not perform well in facilitating and stimulating collaboration here, right? So we see two pretty different developments here. So China kind of becoming an emerging leader within this organization, and Russia the exact opposite. It does not exercise any leadership role at this point. And if we move on to participation in these initiatives, so without this leadership element, we see that Russia is below average, the all country average, whereas China is above the average. So this kind of aligns with the picture we already obtained for leadership. So China is not the most active member, but it is more active than most other members, which shows that it is above average. But even China does not really stick out as, you know, the pushiest of all countries in the Clean Energy Ministerial. But what we see is that China is super clever in what it does. So first of all, here we limited our analysis to the initiatives, which are more like stable. But if we had included campaigns, we would have seen that China is particularly active there. So they seem to be preparing a future leadership role in this organization by launching campaigns and seeing like how the campaigns go and hoping to, you know, scale up the campaigns to initiatives. China is also involved as a leader in more like high-end initiatives, such as the electric vehicles initiatives, where it is the leader of an initiative where you then have the United States and Canada being regular members. So it's very high prestige projects. And you can see that China, they don't participate in an excessive number of initiatives, but they're very strategic in the initiatives in which they participate. They have a very clear agenda. So China now wants to develop the electric vehicles industry. So this is the main agenda they're pursuing in the context of the Clean Energy Ministerial. They really push for electric vehicles and anything that has to do with it, like flanking initiatives. So even though China does not really like stick out as, you know, the new emerging leader of this, there's this possibility that it could become one, and it is super strategic in how it uses the Clean Energy Ministerial to push issues that are of importance for its own economic agenda. And what is also interesting in this context is, so the Clean Energy Ministerial was founded in 2010, and a couple of years later, a complementary high-level energy forum has been founded, and it's called Mission Innovation. It was also founded by the United States, but it is different because the Clean Energy Ministerial is mostly interested in placing clean energy innovation technologies on the market and kind of addressing the market, whereas the Mission Innovation focuses on the step that comes before. So it really focuses, as the name already suggests, on technological innovations. And what is super interesting is that China participates in Mission Innovation. And if you compare its participation in the Clean Energy Ministerial with its participation in Mission Innovation, you see that it has a very coherent agenda and really tries to push this electric vehicles thing. Whereas Russia don't even participate in Mission Innovation, right? So so even though Russia should also have an interest in using the Clean Energy Ministerial among other platforms as a forum to develop solutions, it's relatively detached from what is really going on there, and it certainly does not make any strategic use of the Clean Energy Ministerial, which is a sharp contrast to what China is doing, because China is making very, very good strategic use of the Clean Energy Ministerial. So therefore, the empirical picture, when we kind of zoom into these two countries, confirms the second hypothesis, that China, because of its need to act, is much more active in the Clean Energy Ministerial than Russia. And so to conclude, the first part was pretty much a demonstration of the fact that the SEM was designed as a depoliticized international organization, and our analysis confirms that it is indeed depoliticized to some degree. What is also worth noting is that when we look at China and Russia in particular, so despite the fact that they are major powers, they never played that card in the context of the Clean Energy Ministerial. China is kind of now making more and strategic use of this organization, Russia not so. And well, all I can say at this point is çok teşekkür ederim dinlemeniz için. And if you have any questions, this is my email address. Feel free to send me emails. But now I look forward to the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very comprehensive presentation. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions? You can raise your hand and I will allow you to ask your questions.
If it's okay, I'll stop the presentation, the screen share, because then I can also see you, which would also come in handy. Hold on. So now you should be able to see me, and then I can also see the chat myself. Okay, it was about the coefficients, yeah.
Okay, any questions? From the audience.
Don't be shy. Don't be shy.
Okay, so maybe I'll ask another.
You want to break the ice, perhaps, Güneş? Yeah.
Okay, so so you highlight this depoliticizing role of this institution, but I was also curious about there should be some role for politics and conflict, and so I was curious, for example, if you checked for the role of leadership in initiatives and whether it has an effect on some countries' decision to participate or not in this initiatives. For example, is Russia more likely to participate in an initiative if it's led by China instead of, I don't know, US?
Yeah. Yes. So there's one problem with this. The United States, they kind of, they're super dominant, and many initiatives of the United States, the ones they started are still around, whereas many initiatives started by others are not around anymore. So there's a bit of a methodological problem there, but I mean, this is exactly what I'm interested in. So I have like another idea for a paper where I want to do cluster analysis, and only focus, on the states, really just on the states. For this paper, there is this methodological problem that I either go with the initiatives or I lump everything together, and then I can control for who is the leader of this. But I also ran so many tests, and it is actually not substantiated that I go for a combined analysis, because these initiatives are so different, and therefore I have a methodological problem to test within one initiative whether it matters that the leadership is Korea, for example. Do you see my problem? I cannot vary the leadership because I go initiative by initiative. And I had I actually ran other specifications where I had a composite index, but there the problem really is effectively each initiative is different, right? So it creates a lot of heterogeneity problems if you lump them together. And it's also difficult to work with weights, which I also tried. I actually ran even factor analysis to see like whether I can combine at least some of the initiatives. But even the factor analysis was not very, very compelling, to be honest, right? So I think like what you say is extremely important. And I think this would also explain quite something, but it is difficult to implement it methodologically. I would need to combine all these individual initiatives to have variation on who proposed or who leads an initiative. But if I combine them, I have a heterogeneity problem. But if anybody has an idea, please come forward. I couldn't get my head around this. Yeah, because you're perfectly right. And this is also something I'm thinking whether I should flag this in the regression tables, who the leaders are of the individual initiatives, because that can also, perhaps provide some better understanding. Yeah, I know exactly. I mean, this is absolutely important. I know that, but it's lumping together the initiatives creates problems, but going initiative by initiative. But I think this is the reason why you have so much variation across the different models also, right?
I would think so, because I mean, I understand for example, participation in these initiatives are at much more technical level, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it also indicates there's less politics involved, but it should be still involved at some level.
Yes. Yeah. I know. I hope the cluster analysis will reveal some findings. I haven't done it yet, but this is because this is a paper for which we got a revise and resubmit, which I have to submit soon. So I focused on this angle, because for the first submission we had this combined analysis, and there actually I controlled for it. But the diagnostics were terrible.
Mm-hmm.
It was just not right to combine these initiatives into one variable, because right now my problem is that I have 17 regression models, which doesn't make my life much easier, to be honest. But yeah, it's difficult to come up with, you know, one main takeaway message when you have so many different models. But I think it's still interesting. From this viewpoint, you could even argue it's a very hard test, because you really control for a potential effect of ministers or their ideological background by having so many different model specifications. So it kind of depends a bit on what you actually want to show.
Okay, any questions from our audience? Anyone?
Well, perhaps I can say something. I'm talking also to these people in these organizations. I also asked them, what about Turkey? And what is really interesting is that so they have reached out to Turkey, but apparently Turkey has some reservations to join, because it is expected that you really collaborate, that it's not just joining and then attending meetings, but that you have to, you know, also work in these groups. So apparently this is something that is not very warmly seen from the Turkish perspective, because I mean, it would make a lot of sense that Turkey joined this, especially since the idea is to combine the Clean Energy Ministerial much stronger with G20. So that's the idea, to merge this a little bit more. But apparently they don't like the format.
It's very interesting. I was surprised that you mentioned that they wanted to keep this organization basically small on purpose.
But it's growing still. So Portugal and Poland will join this year. And they have a long list of observing countries. And but again, Turkey has, like, they have been in touch, because if you look at the emissions, I mean, it's clear. Oh, okay, I stopped the presentation. But you could also see Turkey has also a significant contribution to global carbon emissions. And it would be very important to bring Turkey on board. But apparently this is, so they don't seem to like the format.
I may just have a guess. It requires policy capacity, you know, will and resources.
Yeah.
Of these are lacking. I wonder why.
Yeah. So a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? No, but I think it's interesting. I really like this organization, and Mission Innovation is structured in the same way. I think it's interesting because effectively it is not one organization you deal with, but you have like these initiatives where you have like these small subgroups. And that I think makes it quite interesting. But yeah, you're perfectly right. It is the member states or the leaders of these initiatives that have to make sure that it works. And if not, well, it's not good for your reputation. Because then it says also on the website, terminated, right? So, and then people can look it up. Oh, who were the leaders? So it is, I think, a quite effective naming and shaming thing going on here. I mean, I would not like to be the one who proposed something and then it was kind of stopped 2 years later.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so interesting to see. I mean, China is really the country that is taking all sorts of efforts and attempts to shape the future of electric vehicles.
I see.
So I think this is inevitable at this point. So I think it's not going to be Germany, France, or the United States that kind of, you know, come up with the global standard for electric vehicles. I think this is going to be China, because when you look at like how they actually participate in these organizations, it's interesting to see like how well defined their agenda is. So it is really about industrial support here. It's about market development, perhaps more than, it's not so much about climate change, I would say. Perhaps it's a positive side effect, but and Russia is completely out of the game. Yeah, and that's also something that I think it's worth flagging. They could, in theory, they could use this organization. I mean, it's not a renewable energy organization. There's even an initiative on nuclear power, which was proposed by Trump, right? That was one of the things he requested so that the United States would not leave the Clean Energy Ministerial. But you can also, they could also come up with something like, you know, an initiative to make, for example, fossil fuel extraction more energy efficient or less carbon intense. But they don't really seem to understand the strategic possibilities of this.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah, most welcome.
Okay.
Yeah, so any further questions or reactions?
Okay, I'll ask one more time to our audience if anyone have any questions for Dr. Tosun.
Okay.
Well, Caner Hocam, anything you want to add?
No. I just want to thank you again to both of you and Jale especially. I hope we can you know, have another one when in post-COVID-19 world.
Oh, we all hope so. Yeah.
This season Istanbul is very beautiful. Jale, you probably know, and so we will rectify it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you once again for having me. And if anybody's interested in this topic and also in collaboration, I'm around. Just shoot me an email, and well, and I'm always happy to collaborate on these topics. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Also, this video will be available on YouTube, I think. So hopefully it will reach to some other audiences as well. So thank you so much for participating at this event.
Wonderful, it was a
Again,
pleasure.
Look forward to host you on our campus, hopefully in coming years.
Wonderful, thank you so much, and we'll have a lovely weekend. Ve görüşmek üzere.
Görüşmek
Bye-bye.
üzere. Bye bye.